I never thought I'd see the day where my parents would look at me like I was their last hope. But life has a strange way of turning the tables, sometimes slowly, painfully, and then all at once. My name's Ava Morgan. I'm 29 now. But back then, when all of this began, I was just 25 and still hoping, foolishly, that love from your parents was unconditional. I grew up in a modest house in Ohio. Not rich, not poor. Just average. My dad, Peter, ran a small auto shop downtown. My mom, Linda, worked part-time at a local pharmacy. We never struggled for food or clothes, but affection? That was always rationed. From as early as I can remember, everything revolved around my older brother, Scott. He was the golden child, athletic, charming, decent grades, and always in the spotlight.
Me?
I was the backup plan, the one who made dinner when mom worked late, who cleaned up Scott's messes, who learned not to cry too loud. Scott got a car for his 18th birthday. I got a lecture about responsibility. He failed out of his first semester at college. I got accepted into 3 universities with scholarships, and they told me I should stay close to home to help out. I did everything right. Got a degree in finance. Landed a solid job straight out of college. Moved into a small apartment and paid my own way without asking them for a dime. But somehow, none of that ever seemed to matter. Even holidays started feeling like I was intruding on someone else's family. Scott would show up, unannounced, bring some flashy new girlfriend, and my parents would beam like he'd just solved world peace. Meanwhile, I'd bring a homemade pie and be told to sit in the back so his friends could have the couch. It hurt. But I told myself that maybe one day they'd see me. That maybe success would earn their pride. Then came the turning point, the day my grandfather passed away. He was my dad's father, and he'd always treated me differently.
Kindly. Gently.
He once told me, "You've got more heart than the rest of 'em combined, kid." I clung to that when things felt cold at home. He died quietly in his sleep at 92. At the funeral, my parents barely looked at me. I assumed grief made people strange. Until the will was read 2 weeks later. We all gathered at a lawyer's office. My parents, Scott, and me. I wore a black blazer, trying to look composed. Inside, I was shaking. Not because I expected anything, I honestly didn't, but because I just wanted some connection to the one person who'd made me feel seen. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. Scott was left $10,000 to start fresh, the will said. My parents were given the house in Grandview. Then the lawyer paused, adjusted his glasses, and read aloud. To my granddaughter, Ava Morgan, I leave my personal investment account and safety deposit box, contents unknown. My heart dropped. What investment account? My father barked. I wasn't aware of this either. The lawyer replied, calm but firm. It was added 6 months before his passing. The account currently holds just under $650,000. The room went dead silent. My mother gasped. Scott's face turned red. I could feel all their eyes drilling into me like I'd stolen it. You don't even talk to him that often, my mother snapped. I couldn't speak. I didn't know. I didn't ask for any of it. But for once someone had picked me. The following months were a blur. My parents didn't congratulate me.
They didn't check in.
Instead, they avoided me completely.
Cold. Distant.
Like I was suddenly an outsider. At Christmas, they didn't invite me. I only found out about the family dinner through a Facebook post, Scott smiling with a beer in hand while my parents posed in matching sweaters. I cried for an hour that night. Then I got up, shut off my phone, and decided, no more waiting for love that would never come. I moved to Chicago, got a bigger apartment, invested smartly, started my own consulting firm. Within 2 years, I'd grown my grandfather's gift into $1 million portfolio. And just when I'd stopped looking over my shoulder, they showed up again. One afternoon, I was finishing a meeting when I got a knock at my office door. I thought it was my assistant, but it was my mother. She looked thinner.
Tired.
Her eyes scanned the expensive office like she didn't know where she was. Ava, she said, voice trembling. We need your help. I stared at her, stunned. My father stepped in beside her, hat in hand. They weren't dressed for a visit. They were dressed for desperation. What happened? I asked cautiously. They hesitated. Scott had convinced them to co-sign on a business loan, something about a sports bar. The business flopped. The debt collectors didn't care who had failed. They came for the signatures. My parents were about to lose their home. And that's when she said it. The thing I will never forget. You have more than enough, Ava. Your brother deserves a second chance too. Help us help him.
Deserve?
That word sliced me open. I felt 14 again, sitting at the kids' table while Scott got praised for stealing a neighbor's bike. I felt 17 being grounded for something he did. I felt 22, begging them to be proud of my degree, and getting silence. I'm sorry, I whispered. My mom's eyes filled with tears. My father's face turned red, the same way it had when I got the inheritance. You'd really let your family suffer when you're living like this? He growled. And that's when something shifted. I looked my father dead in the eye and said, You already let me suffer. For years. You left me nothing. Not just money, love, support, dignity. And now you want everything. He tried to speak, but I stood up. You told me once I was on my own. You made that choice. And I made peace with it. My mother tried to say something else, but I was already walking toward the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't shout. I just closed it gently. And that silence? It was the loudest sound in the world. People think walking away from your parents is like slamming a door and never looking back. It's not. It's standing in front of that door every night, hand on the handle, remembering all the times you begged to be let in, and finally deciding not to knock anymore. After they left my office that day, my heart didn't feel victorious. It felt hollow. I had waited so long for them to want me,
To see me.
and when they finally did, it was only because they needed something, not because they missed their daughter. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But all I did was sit in my sleek glass office and stare out at the Chicago skyline, a million twinkling lights below me, and whisper, that chapter's closed. Still, the past doesn't let go just because you're ready. A week later, I got a call from Scott. Unknown number. Straight to voicemail.
His voice was calm. Too calm. Ava.
We should talk. Not about them, about us. I messed up. Call me back. I didn't. The next week, another message.
Ava.
Look, I know you're mad, but we're family. You've got enough to help. I wouldn't be asking if it wasn't serious. Then one more, 2 days later. This one not calm at all. I heard what you said to Mom and Dad. That you don't owe us anything. I hope your money keeps you warm, Ava. Because when it's gone, and it will be, you'll be alone. And we won't be there. I deleted it. But I heard those words echo for days. I tried to move on. Focused on work. My clients. My team. The business was growing and I was proud of it. Every cent I'd earned had been my own doing, no cosigns, no shortcuts. But a part of me felt raw again. Like I was back in that house, 15 years old, hearing Scott get praised for microwaving dinner while I cleaned the entire kitchen. I talked to my therapist about it. She asked, Do you want revenge? Or peace? And I said, I want both. That same night, I opened an old wooden box from college, the one where I kept letters, notes, memories. Tucked in the bottom was a birthday card from my grandfather. I was 21 when he gave it to me. Inside, he'd written in shaky cursive, Ava, some people don't see gold when it's in front of them. Let them chase pennies. You shine anyway. I clutched that card like it was the last real hug I had from my family. And then I made a decision. If they were going to treat me like a stranger, then I was done pretending I belonged to them. A month passed. No more calls. No more voicemails. I assumed they'd found another way to fix their mess. Until I got a letter in the mail. Certified. Formal envelope. The return address? Their lawyer. At first, I thought it was a bluff. But the moment I opened it, my hands went cold. They were contesting Grandpa's will. They were trying to argue that I manipulated an elderly man into altering his estate. I felt sick. I called the lawyer who'd handled the original reading. He was calm but firm. They don't have a case. The documents were signed, witnessed, and filed properly. But be prepared. These kinds of claims aren't about winning. They're about punishing you. And that's when I realized this wasn't about the money anymore. It was about making sure I never forgot my place. They were dragging me through the mud because I didn't bow when they told me to. I hired a top attorney, one who specialized in inheritance harassment. Her name was Ms. Dalton, and from the moment she walked into my apartment, crisp navy suit, hair pinned up, eyes like steel, I felt safer. They want war, she said. We give them paperwork. We filed motions. We gathered depositions. We subpoenaed family records. It turned out Grandpa had left journals, handwritten entries in which he detailed why he left me the account and box. One passage hit me hard. Ava has always been quiet, but she listens. She helps without being asked. I see myself in her, the parts that are easily overlooked. She'll need something when I'm gone. This world doesn't always reward the quiet ones. It was undeniable. They had no ground to stand on. 3 months later, the judge dismissed the claim with prejudice, meaning they couldn't try again. I should have celebrated, but I didn't. I just felt tired of chasing a family that never wanted to catch me. But then something happened. A week after the ruling, I got a knock on my apartment door. It was late. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there was my mother, disheveled, rain-drenched, eyes swollen from crying. I stood in the doorway, not moving, not speaking. She looked up at me and whispered, "I'm sorry. Not for the case. Not for the will. I'm sorry we made you feel like you weren't enough." I swallowed hard. My throat burned. Why now? Because I saw the journals, she said. Scott showed them to me before the ruling. I didn't know Dad wrote about you like that. I didn't know how much I missed. It was the first time I'd ever seen her admit fault. But then she added, "I don't expect anything. I just wanted to say it." And for once, I believed her. I didn't invite her in.
Not yet.
But I didn't close the door, either. She left a small package on the doorstep. Inside was a photo album, one I thought had been lost years ago. Childhood pictures. Me and Grandpa. Me and Mom. Before the bitterness. Taped to the last page was a note in her handwriting. "You were never invisible, Ava. I was just too blind to see clearly. I'm sorry for what I did when I had the chance. And grateful you became someone strong despite it." I cried that night. Not out of sadness, but because I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't mean you go back to how things were. Sometimes, it just means you stop carrying their mistakes on your back. People always ask what it's like when someone who's hurt you apologizes. Really apologizes. Here's the truth. It's confusing. It doesn't erase the past. It doesn't change the years you spent waiting for a hug that never came, or an "I'm proud of you" that never arrived. It just sits there, like a key you're not sure you want to use. That's how I felt after my mom showed up in the rain with that album and that letter. Grateful, guarded, and still deeply hurt. The next morning, I called Ms. Dalton. "Is there anything more I need to worry about legally?" She responded with a soft chuckle.
"No. They won't touch you again."
"You've been more than generous by not filing a counterclaim for harassment." That was it. Legally, it was over. Emotionally, not even close. 2 weeks passed. No messages from my mom. No surprise visits. Just silence. And then, Scott texted me. "Scott, saw Mom dropped off the album. Guess she's forgiven. Now how about helping the rest of us?" No hello. No apology. Just entitlement, straight as ever. I stared at the message for a long time. This was the same brother who once locked me out of the house when I was 13 and told our parents I ran away for attention. The same brother who called me weird, moody, too much, and got away with all of it because he was the golden child. And now, because I didn't shut the door on Mom, he thought I was open season. I didn't reply, but something in me clicked. If Scott thought the door was open, I needed to show him it never would be. I made a plan. I called my realtor, the same one who helped me buy my current penthouse, and said, "I want something bigger. Not because I need it, because I earned it." We found a gorgeous property on the North Shore, A 3-story modern estate with glass walls, a private dock, and views of the lake that took your breath away. I bought it in cash. Then I did something I'd dreamed about since I was a teenager. I made it a sanctuary. Not for my family. For girls like me. The ones overlooked.
Silenced.
Undervalued. I turned the guest house into a transitional space for young women aging out of foster care, a place where they could land softly and rebuild with dignity. I furnished it with warmth, pastel throws, plush beds, shelves full of books. I hired a counselor to visit twice a week. Stocked the fridge with fresh food. I named it House Ava, because I never had a house that felt like mine growing up. And now I was giving that feeling to someone else. Word got around quickly. A former classmate sent me a message on Instagram. Wow, your parents must be so proud. Funny how people assume the story flipped just because I smiled in a press photo. But the truth is, I didn't do it for pride. I did it because I wanted the story to end differently. Not with bitterness, but with purpose. And I wasn't done yet. One afternoon, while I was planting hydrangeas along the walkway at House Ava, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. I let it go to voicemail. But the transcript popped up on my screen. Ava, it's Dad. I know I've never said this before, but
I'm sorry.
I let a lot of things happen that I should have stopped. Your brother, your mother, me. We were wrong. I was wrong. My hands froze in the soil. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I saw you. I always did. I just didn't know how to love you the right way. I sat back, dirt on my jeans, heart pounding. My father, the man who once slapped me in public for refusing to hand over my apartment, was calling to say he saw me? I wanted to scream.
To sob.
To throw the phone into the flower bed. Instead, I played the message again.
And again.
And then I called my therapist. Her voice was gentle. How do you want to respond, Ava? I whispered. I want to say nothing. Then that's what you do. But silence has its own ripple effect. 3 days later, Mom called again. This time, she didn't ask for anything. She just said, "Your father's sick." I didn't respond. She added, "He's asking for you." And I finally said, "He asked for a lot of things. I just never used to count." She went quiet. I hung up. I cried. Because I wasn't a monster. I still loved them, deep down under all the cracks. But I had built a life out of the ashes they left me in. And I wasn't about to burn it all down to play nursemaid to people who only remembered me when they needed something. A week later, a letter arrived. Not from them. From their lawyer. They had drafted a new will. Apparently, after everything, they'd tried to right their wrongs. The will left their remaining property, which wasn't much, to be divided between Scott and me. But here's the twist. They had named me executor. I laughed out loud when I read that. They still wanted me to clean up their messes, even from beyond the grave. But this time, I held the power. I sat with it, thought about it. Then I called the lawyer and said, "When the time comes, I'll handle it. With dignity. Because that's who I am." A month later, my father passed. I went to the funeral. Alone. Wore a black dress and no makeup. Hair pinned up. Expression calm. Scott was there. Red-eyed. Smirking when he saw me. Mom barely looked up. When the pastor invited people to speak, Scott stood. Talked about Dad's strength and family legacy. I waited. And then, I stood too. I walked to the front, cleared my throat, and said, "My father didn't always know how to show love. But he gave me something else, a mirror. One I used to build my life in opposition to. And, in doing so, I learned how to love myself. So while I grieve, I also celebrate. Not because of what I lost, but because of what I built without it." The room was silent. But one woman in the back, a young girl I recognized from House Ava, wiped a tear from her cheek and nodded. That's when I knew I hadn't just closed the chapter. I'd rewritten the whole book. You'd think a funeral would be the final chapter. But in my family, it was just the prelude to the next mess. After I stepped down from the podium, I didn't wait for anyone to thank me. I returned to my seat, folded my hands, and stared straight ahead as the pastor finished the service. Scott wouldn't even look at me, but I could feel his rage vibrating through the air like heat off pavement. It wasn't grief in his eyes. It was entitlement.
Fear.
Maybe even panic. Because deep down, he knew. He knew that our father, the one who raised him on gold and raised me on guilt, had just handed me the reins. And I wasn't going to let him take the wheel again. After the service, people milled around outside the church. Some offered quick condolences. Others avoided me entirely, like I was radioactive. Scott made a show of hugging everyone, crying on command. His wife clung to his arm like a trophy. But when he finally approached me, his mask slipped. "Nice speech," he muttered. "You practicing for the will reading too?" I raised an eyebrow.
Why?
Nervous? He smirked, but there was no warmth in it. "I know Mom and Dad came around in the end. I'm not worried." I leaned in slightly. "Then why are you sweating through your $800 jacket?" He didn't reply, just clenched his jaw and walked away. 3 days later, I sat in the stuffy conference room of my parents' estate lawyer. It was strange being there alone. No siblings flanking me. No parents dominating the space. Just me and Mr. Halpern, a tired man in thick glasses who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He slid a folder across the desk. "Your parents updated their will about 2 months before your father passed. Your mother signed the same documents." I opened it. Scott was still listed as a beneficiary, a 50% split. But I was the executor, and I could see immediately why Scott was panicking. The estate was smaller than it used to be. Our father had refinanced the house twice in recent years, but there was still money.
Stocks.
Some land. A small business investment. And control over how and when things were liquidated? That rested with me. That night, I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by paperwork. It felt like some twisted cosmic joke. They had left me nothing before, not even their trust. Now they were leaving me the burden of making things right. But I wasn't interested in revenge. Not in the petty sense. I didn't want to punish Scott. I wanted to show him and everyone else what real legacy looked like. I met with my financial advisor. We combed through the assets line by line. I made a few calls, made some changes. Then I called Mr. Halpern and said, "We're ready to move forward with distribution." Scott showed up to the lawyer's office with his chest puffed out like a rooster. He probably thought I was going to cry or plead. Instead, I handed him a folder. "This is your portion," I said calmly. "Minus outstanding debts Dad left behind, which are legally your shared responsibility." He blinked. "What debts?" Mr. Halpern adjusted his glasses. "There's roughly $73,000 in unpaid loans tied to a failed business venture your father co-signed with you." Scott's mouth fell open. "Excuse me? That's not my—" "It is," I interrupted. "You signed it. I saw the paperwork. And since you're a 50% heir, it comes out of your share." Scott stood, veins bulging in his neck. "This is your fault. You poisoned them against me." I stayed seated. "You did that all by yourself, Scott." After he stormed out, Mr. Halpern looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "Most people in your position would have frozen him out completely. But you handled this with grace." I nodded. But it wasn't just grace. It was clarity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And I chose to be better than what they made me believe I was. With my portion of the inheritance, I expanded House Ava. I bought the neighboring property and turned it into a learning center, free classes, career coaching, even therapy scholarships. I invited women from shelters, group homes, and transitional housing to apply. And I watched as they bloomed. One young woman, Tasha, hugged me after her first week. "I've never had my own room before," she whispered. That night, I cried for hours. Because I had turned my family's rejection into someone else's rescue. And that meant more than any apology ever could. Months passed. My mother stopped calling. Scott went quiet. I heard he sold his house. I heard his wife left him. I didn't gloat. Because I didn't build my life to watch others fall. I built it so I could finally rise. And then one day, just when I thought the story was over, I received a letter.
Handwritten.
From my mother. Inside was a photo of us, her, me, and my father, when I was maybe 7.
She had her arms around me.
And she'd written on the back, "I know I was never the mother you needed,
But I see you now.
I really do. You are everything I could never be brave enough to become." I didn't cry this time. I smiled. Because the girl in that photo? She finally had peace. There's something strange about being needed by the very people who once discarded you. At first, I thought it was some kind of twisted test, like life was dangling irony in my face to see how I'd respond. But the truth was far simpler. They didn't want me. They wanted access. Access to my money, my peace, my stability, the things I had earned without them. It started with a knock on my office door. I was reviewing a new community grant application, a small college-bound girl named Janiyah from Detroit, when my assistant poked her head in. "There's a woman here. Says she's your mother." My pen froze mid-signature. I hadn't heard that word, mother, in months. It had taken effort, painful effort, to even say her name out loud during legal documents. And now she was just here? I closed the folder. Send her in. She entered slowly, like a ghost unsure of its welcome. Her coat looked expensive. Her makeup was perfect. But her eyes were tired. She sat across from me, folding her gloved hands like we were at a coffee shop instead of in the office of the daughter she'd erased.
"Hi, Ava."
I didn't respond right away. So she continued, her voice too calm, too controlled. "I heard about the learning center, the shelter, all of it. I didn't know you had that in you." I smiled, not warmly. "You didn't know because you never wanted to see it." She flinched, but only slightly. "I made mistakes," she said, lips pressed tight. "But your father—" "No," I cut her off. "You don't get to put this on him. You were there. Every time I was dismissed, ignored, pushed aside. You were there. You nodded. You said nothing." She blinked quickly. "I came to talk about Scott. Of course. Not to apologize. Not to connect. But for him." I leaned back in my chair. "What's going on?" She looked down at her hands. "He's losing the house. The job he took, the finance firm, it went under. They're saying he mismanaged the client accounts. There's going to be a lawsuit." I almost laughed. Not because I wanted to see Scott suffer, but because of how predictable it all was. "And?" I asked. "We need help." Her eyes flicked up. "He needs help. I thought maybe since you have access to the estate and your investments." I let silence fill the room. Let her sit in the discomfort she never gave me the dignity of feeling in peace. And then I said it. Just 3 words. But they changed the air between us. I said no. She blinked, confused, as if I'd misunderstood. "Ava, I don't think you—" I said no. I repeated louder now. Firmer. "The answer is no. You didn't just leave me nothing. You trained me to believe I deserved nothing. And now that I've built something for myself, you come crawling, not even for yourself, but for him." She looked shocked and a little humiliated, which, ironically, was how I'd felt at 16 when I found out she'd given my college fund to Scott to buy a second car. Or when I came home from college that Christmas and my room had been turned into a guest suite for his in-laws. She had always made sure I was second. Or last. "Not anymore." "I'm sorry," she whispered. But her voice didn't carry weight. Not the kind that sticks. Later that night, I sat on my balcony, wrapped in a sweater and sipping mint tea, watching the sun melt over the city skyline. I wasn't angry anymore. That had passed. I wasn't even sad. I just felt free. It's funny, isn't it? When people say you owe them, they forget what they never gave you in the first place. The next morning, I got a call. "Scott." I almost didn't answer, but something told me I needed to hear it. "Ava," he said, breathless, like he'd been pacing. "Mom told me." I waited. "I get it. You're upset. You always thought we were favored or whatever, but this is serious." I stayed quiet. He continued, his voice rising. "This isn't the time to settle scores. I'm your brother. We're family. I'm not asking for everything, just a loan to cover the lawyer. Just until I get back on my feet.
I almost smiled at that.
Back on whose feet?
Mine?
Scott, I said slowly. You remember when I was 17, and you told Dad I crashed the car when it was really you? Silence. And he made me work all summer to pay for the repairs while you flew to Miami with your friends? More silence. This is me crashing the car, I said softly. This is me learning how to fix it myself. And you're the one asking for the keys now. I hung up, and I blocked the number. The peace that followed was unexpected. I thought I'd feel guilt, but I didn't. Not even a flicker. I felt relief. Because sometimes protecting your peace means breaking the cycle. Even if it hurts. Even if they cry. Even if they say, but we're family. Weeks passed, and then something strange happened. I started getting letters. From women I'd never met. Ava, your story inspired me to leave my abusive husband. Ava, thank you for what you're doing for girls like us. Ava, I never knew someone like me could matter until I saw you speak. Each one reminded me of that little girl I used to be, waiting for her parents to see her, hear her, choose her. They didn't, but the world did. And I chose myself. I never expected to hear from my father again. After that cold slap at the will reading, after watching him sign over everything to Scott without a blink, I'd buried the idea of ever having a dad long ago. But there he was, standing in the lobby of my foundation building, leaning on a cane, and looking smaller than I remembered. Ava, he said when I stepped off the elevator. We need to talk. I studied him, not with anger, with curiosity, like someone inspecting a broken heirloom to see if it could be repaired or should be discarded for good. We sat in the community kitchen of the shelter I'd helped open. He watched the volunteers in silence, his gaze lingering on a young mother spooning oatmeal into her toddler's mouth. You built all this? He finally asked. I nodded. With my own 2 hands. No inheritance. No help. He didn't say anything for a while, just ran his fingers along the edge of the table. Then, I was wrong. The words didn't hit the way I thought they would. They didn't feel like closure. They felt rehearsed. About what exactly? I asked. He glanced at me. I was wrong to leave you out of the will. Wrong to assume Scott would do right by the family. I was misled. Misled? I raised an eyebrow. You weren't tricked, Dad. You made a choice. A deliberate one. And now that it's blowing up in your face, you want to undo it. He shifted uncomfortably. It's not just about the money. Then what is it about? His voice got quieter. We need a place to stay.
Ah.
There it was. Not about regrets. Not about love. Not about reconciliation. About needs. Apparently, Scott's case had gone from bad to worse. He'd drained their savings trying to settle quietly. But the media got wind of it. Embezzlement, false accounting, breach of trust. My father's name was on several shared accounts. Their assets were frozen. Their credit shredded. And now my once proud parents were sleeping on an air mattress in a friend's basement. He's still your brother, my dad said stiffly. He's made mistakes. But haven't we all? I stared at him. This man who told me at 19 that I was a drain on the family for wanting to pursue social work. This man who stood at my graduation like a stranger, arms crossed, lips thin, never clapping once. I'm not angry, I said calmly. I just don't owe you anything. That shook him more than yelling would have. Because he always assumed I'd stay soft. That I'd keep coming back. That I'd keep proving myself for scraps of his approval. But I was done begging. Later that evening, I received a voicemail from Scott. I know you think you're punishing us, he said, bitterness crackling in every syllable. But you're just proving you were always out for yourself. You're not better than us, Ava. You just got lucky. Lucky. That word lit a fire in my chest. He called this hard-earned peace, this empire of survival, luck. He didn't see the nights I ate ramen for weeks to save money for textbooks. He didn't see the clients I sat with hand in hand when they had no one else. He didn't see the rejection letters, the closed doors, the patronizing laughs from men in boardrooms. But I made it anyway. And they hate me for it. Because I made it without them. A week passed. Then 2. Then I got a letter. A legal one. My parents had filed a formal request for temporary guardianship over one of my trust properties, the lakeside retreat I bought as a sanctuary for trauma survivors. They wanted to live there, claiming it would be mutually beneficial and a positive PR move. They were trying to manipulate my kindness. Again. But this time, I had something they didn't expect. A team. My lawyer, Devin, a fierce black woman who didn't play games, met me in my office with a folder, her expression sharp. "They're grasping at straws," she said. "We can push back and file a cease and desist for misuse of your name in the press too. You want to go public?" I hesitated. Not because I was scared, but because I was ready. "Let's do it," I said. They wanted to turn this into a show. Let's show them what justice really looks like. The article went live on Monday. Disinherited daughter builds empire while family seeks shelter. It didn't paint them as villains. I didn't need to do that. I let the facts speak. And people listened. Strangers began sharing their own stories of being cut out, dismissed, betrayed by the people who should have protected them most. And suddenly, I wasn't just that girl who got left out of a will. I was the voice for the ones no one believed. One morning, I found a woman sitting on the bench outside my center, crying. Mid-40s, disheveled, holding a file folder close to her chest. "I'm sorry," she said when she saw me. "I saw you on the news. I didn't know where else to go." She handed me the folder. Inside were court documents. Divorce. Custody battle. Letters from a daughter she hadn't seen in 2 years. "You helped me," she whispered. "Without knowing me. Without judging me. Just thank you." I didn't cry. Not until she left. Because in that moment I realized my story had stopped being about revenge. It had become something bigger. But the final test? That came 1 month later, when I got a message from the hospital. My father had collapsed. Stroke. He was stable but weak. And the nurse said he'd asked for me. I stood in that sterile hallway, heart pounding. Not with fear, but with finality. I walked in. He looked older. So much older. There were tubes and machines. He turned his head slowly when I approached. "Ava," he croaked. I waited. He reached for my hand. I didn't give it. "Do you hate me?" he asked. I shook my head. "I don't hate you," I whispered. "But I don't need you." His eyes welled with something. Sadness? Or just regret? "I thought money would protect us," he said weakly. "I thought giving it to Scott meant we'd all be safe." "You didn't want safety," I replied. "You wanted control." He didn't argue. He knew. "I'm sorry," he said. "For real, this time. I wish I had seen you." I stood. Took a breath. "You didn't." But I saw myself. And then I walked out. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally did about me. People always say forgiveness is for you, not for them. I used to roll my eyes at that. I thought it was just a polite way of saying forget what they did. But standing on the stage that day, in front of hundreds of women, survivors, students, and strangers who'd followed my journey, I finally understood it. Forgiveness doesn't mean you let them back in. It means you let yourself out. Out of the pain. Out of the cycle. Out of the grip of someone else's decisions. The conference was being held at my own community center. 3 years ago, it had been an empty lot. Now, it was a 6-story haven, complete with counseling services, a legal aid clinic, a co-working space for women-run startups, and emergency housing upstairs. The keynote speaker had canceled last minute, and the organizers asked me to step in. I laughed. Not because I was nervous. Because life really had come full circle. I stood at the podium in a black tailored pantsuit, crisp, grounded, unshakable. I looked nothing like the girl in the floral dress at that reading. The one who got slapped. The one who got disinherited. The one who watched her parents hand everything over to a brother who saw her as nothing. Now, I own the table they once refused to give me a seat at. I began to speak. I wasn't supposed to succeed, I told the audience. At least not according to my parents. They believed everything valuable had already been handed down, and that I was simply meant to applaud from the sidelines. A few heads nodded in the crowd. Some teared up. I thought I needed their love to validate my worth. I chased their approval like oxygen. But when they finally shut the door in my face, something remarkable happened. I paused, looking across the room. I built my own house. After the event, people came up to hug me. They shared their own stories of being cast out, overlooked, humiliated. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like a leader. Later that night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Scott.
Drunk.
Rambling. He was living in a motel now, blaming me for not helping the family save face. You turned the whole world against us, he slurred. What happened to loyalty? I let him talk. Let him dig his hole. Then, when he finally asked the real question, can you just send a little money? I said what I'd always been too scared to say before.
No.
Simple.
Calm.
Final. I don't owe you for your jealousy, I said. And I won't water the weeds that try to choke me. He called me a few names before hanging up. And I smiled, because I used to cry after calls like that.
Now,
I don't even flinch. My mother never reached out again. She made her bed beside my father's pride, and I suppose she decided to lie in it, cold sheets and all. I heard through an old neighbor that they'd moved into subsidized housing and were living quietly now. No trust fund. No inheritance. No friends from the old golf club. They faded into the shadows. And I didn't chase them. Because some people only show you their love when they think it can buy something. But I was never for sale. A few months later, I received a letter. It was from the lawyer handling my grandmother's old estate. Apparently, before she passed, years ago, she'd left a box in her safe labeled, "For Ava." Inside the box, a handwritten note, a small gold bracelet, and a deed to the small, abandoned cottage where she used to bake pies and sing lullabies to me on the porch swing. It was never registered under my parents' estate. She'd kept it separate.
Just for me.
Just in case. The note read, "You won't need their permission to bloom, sweetheart. You never did. Love, Grandma." I cried. But not because I was sad. Because someone had seen me, long before I ever saw myself. I turned the cottage into a weekend retreat center. Free for young girls aging out of the foster system. A place for reflection, rebuilding, and resilience. I named it the Bloom House. Every time I visited, I wore the bracelet. Because her belief in me had been quiet, but it echoed through every success I ever claimed. Today, I live in a penthouse I bought myself. Not out of revenge, but because I can. Because the same people who said, "You'll never make it without us," now live in a world where I did. Because power isn't in revenge alone. It's in freedom. Freedom from needing their apology. Freedom from chasing their love. Freedom from becoming bitter. I am not who they said I was. I am who I decided to become. And when people ask me now, "Aren't you angry about what they did to you?" I say,
No.
because if they hadn't left me with nothing, I never would have built everything.